My child sexual abuse started right after my 9th birthday, and my abuse lasted for 6 years, got extremely bad through the years, and pretty much blacked out my entire age 9 to 15 for the most part.
Everybody, welcome back. I am your host, Stacey Uhrig, and today's guest is Ashley Pereira. So let me tell you a little bit about Ashley. Ashley is a survivor and mental health advocate, 3-time founder, and a seasoned professional on a mission. She's healed herself from childhood sexual abuse and suicide attempts, and she now champions trauma survivors and women, helping them attain confidence, balance, and success in both life and business. And she does this through her business and brand consultancy called Ivory Gold. She specializes in working with executive and entrepreneurial women who are dealing with trauma, dealing with triggers, and their own mental health challenges. She helps them transform their visions and goals into sustainable revenue growth via coaching, consulting, and a lab mastermind that she's put together. I love the fact that she's taken her challenge and turned it into a gift. So welcome, Ashley. How are you?
Thanks. I'm so well. Thanks so much for having me.
And where are you coming from today?
I am in today, sunny South Florida.
Is that where you live?
It is. Yes. Okay. I live near Fort Lauderdale.
So nice. It's sunny but cold here. I live right outside of New York City. Oh. So you're a survivor of child sexual abuse and a failed suicide. Let's just open it up. Tell us what happened.
Yeah. And it's many failed suicide attempts. There's one primarily that I talk about as far as adulthood, but my child sexual abuse started right after my 9th birthday. I honestly don't remember too much of my childhood before that, especially as my immediate family is concerned. I have a lot of memories with my grandparents and the way that they interacted with me and the things that we did together. But besides my memories with my grandparents, I don't remember anything prior to my abuse. And my abuse lasted for 6 years, got extremely bad through the years, and pretty much blacked out my entire age 9 to 15 for the most part. And my abuse abruptly ended at 15 because I started physically fighting back. So it just changed into a different situation where I was then physically abused instead. And all the while, I absolutely had suicide attempts, and I was very introverted. I went through a lot of bullying during that time as well, and just totally changed in terms of me as a person and how kids should behave.
Well, I have so many questions about this because the first question I have in my mind comes from a saying, that often in the trauma space, we say, when we see a child is changing and their behaviors are changing, we shouldn't really focus on the behavior. We should be asking why, right? And what is it that happened to the person? And so often trauma is not the event. Trauma is the interpretation of what's happening in the event. But more than that, sometimes it's who could you go to in that experience? So who could you go to during this 6-year period of time?
Well, for me, right, just turning 9 years old, it started honestly like days after my birthday. And so still with that 8-year-old brain, the first person that you're going to go to is probably your mom, right? Your mom's your nurturer and the person that you go to feel good. And I did. And unfortunately for me, I was told that I was lying. I was making things up. I was coached on staying silent because somehow, I don't know if I did it or if my mom or someone else did it. Because like I said, I don't remember a lot of that time prior to starting my trauma healing. But someone told someone And it did end up getting to DCF and the authorities and social services. And I do remember being coached multiple times on staying silent and being quiet and not
who
doing
was coaching
things.
you on that?
My mom. So she was the one telling me, like, you can't break up our family. We won't have money. You need to be quiet because I can't take care of you. And there were people that came to my school. I don't know if it was right after. I don't know the length of time, but I do know that I was pulled out of my class while I was in elementary school. I was pulled to go to talk to someone from social services and the police station in the front office. I remember sitting in a room and literally saying nothing because I was told not to. I did not say anything at all. Not one word came out of my mouth. I do vividly remember that, but after that, I never said anything again about my abuse. Like when you're a child and you're that age, you're taught to listen to your parents and do what they say. And especially at that age, which is like right before you're really coming into understanding your own decision making and the consequences and all of that, like you're still in the mode of what my parents say is correct. This is what I'm supposed to do. So that's what I did. And it just carried with me. And I definitely turned into not only protector of me, but protector of my family, being told as a 9-year-old, our entire family's safety relies on you.
If you share what is happening to you, regardless of whether or not it's appropriate or not, then you will be the problem. If you share, because you might end up being the person that breaks up the entire family. Yeah. That's not the first time I've heard that scenario from someone. And, I guess the question I would have for you is, obviously there were suicidalities. So there was a part of you that was like, there's no hope here because I can't do anything to protect myself, right? You can't fight. You can't flee. I mean, I guess you could have run away.
But I tried. I got in trouble.
Right.
It's not fun.
And so what we end up doing is our other two coping strategies would be to either freeze and get paralyzed or to fawn our way out of it, which is like show up as the good girl, be the people pleaser, don't set any boundaries. So what coping strategy did you use to survive this?
I mean, my fight or flight definitely kicked in, and I experienced blackouts during every single event, which the events were very frequent, which is a huge reason why I don't remember that major part of my childhood, is because I was just in constant high, cortisol levels, and I was constantly on edge. I definitely became a lot more protective of myself, which didn't help physically, right? At that age, I don't have strength or anything. I can't really say anything for the most part because I am shut up physically or by my parents or whatever the situation is. And I naturally turned into a person that was, okay, I have to be white picket fence on the outside because I'm told that I can't say anything. So that means that for the rest of my life, like I have to be perfect and I have to act like everything is perfect and that I'm happy all the time. And I definitely naturally went into, not people pleaser, but more so make sure that other people feel light when they're around me and not heavy and not stressed out. And I became this person that people naturally would come to feel good, whether they're telling stories or they just want to laugh or be happy. And I used to hear all the time, growing up and even still, one of the biggest comments that I think that I get from people is, when you walk into a room, the whole room just lights up because your big smile comes in and you just make everyone feel good. And looking back after I'm 8 years into my trauma healing now, I get that and I understand all of that. But at the time, hearing that inside, I was like, you don't know what I do to make myself go to sleep at night. You don't know what I do just to survive the day and what I'm feeling inside. And even at the time, I don't understand those things because I wasn't
what were
taught
you
to
doing?
understand anything. I mean, there was definitely like asphyxiation, and I would try multiple things either to kill myself or just to make myself like pass out at night to be able to sleep. Most of the events took place at night, so sleeping was very hard for me. It's still something that's hard for me to this day. It's easier, but because of that, I couldn't sleep, and I was up all the time, and it created a different person during the day too.
I have worked with a client who had a similar childhood experience and could sleep easily during the day, but never at night. And, you know, it was interesting because she actually originally came to me for lack of motivation and procrastination.
Yeah.
And as we were diving into it, and secondarily, she starts sharing with me, this is years ago, well, I don't sleep. And I was like, okay, well, let's talk a little bit. And she goes, and it's like a real issue. Like there was all these different, mechanisms put into place to try to promote the sleeping, and the sleeping wasn't happening. But for some reason, she didn't think to come to me about the sleep. She was coming to me about the symptoms of the lack of sleep, right? The numbing, which was another symptom. The numbing behaviors, and then those were the habits, but then also the aftermath of that. I'm groggy. I don't have motivation to get to the gym. I'm so tired. And then that's affecting how I do the work, and it's affecting how I eat. Like it was just a, railroad of train tracks. And so we decided to work on the sleep, under hypnosis, because I do hypnosis with my clients, and really get to the root and the reason or the cause of why she's so hyper vigilant at night. And really helping her, she was in her 60s at the time, reframe for her 60-year-old self and kind of let go of the parts that were keeping her hypervigilant that were still 8, 9, 10, 11 years old.
Yeah.
Right. And allowing them to see she is more resourced now. And she does have more voice and choice. And she does have more agency over her life. And maybe those parts can take a rest now.
Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard when you are, I will say, I do feel very lucky that I'm almost 36 now, and I'm in my 8th year of healing finally. And I didn't start that process until a suicide attempt 8 years ago. And I know that I am very lucky to be this young and to be healing through my trauma in the manner that I am, because from what I know from the organizations I've worked with and the trauma therapists that I work with professionally, I know that the average age, if someone's going to come out about their trauma, it's not until their mid-60s. And then there's so many more complications during that healing because so much more time has gone by. And as challenging as it is for me right now, I do know that I am very proud of myself, and I'm very blessed, despite the circumstances, to be going through my trauma healing at this point in time.
So I'd like to focus a little bit on that. What was the event that caused you to get onto this healing journey?
So it was triggered by force. There was a lot of time between me leaving my house right after high school, packing up my car, just getting in the car to drive anywhere that I could find, and starting my career. And I actually had the opportunity, even between then and my last suicide attempt 8 years ago, I had the opportunity to prosecute my abuser, which there was other events that happened that I can't talk about, but having this opportunity at the age of 21 to come face to face in the public eye, finally tell my story, because I was in this protector mode. So even at that point, I was like, it's not for me. It's for someone else, and it's for other people, and it's to do the right thing and to help these things be known. I was still in the controlling protector mode of making sure I was doing it for other people. So I still hadn't started healing at that point.
You weren't putting yourself first yet.
Yeah, I wasn't. And that being my first time at the age of 21, like coming out publicly outside of my mom that I told, it had a negative impact on my relationships overall and my career overall over time, as well as my health. So from that point forward, something triggered in me because I was forced to have to revisit these places that I had blacked out. I had totally forgotten about that ever existed just to survive. And because I was forced to start remembering these things for the purpose of being in court and prosecuting my abuser, I began getting insane triggers. And this is way before my CPTSD diagnosis or anything. So I didn't know what these things were at the time.
And what did those triggers look like for you? Just to paint a picture for the listener.
So at that
without trying to trigger you, by the way, I just want to really be clear on that.
Oh, thank you. I'm okay, by the way. At this point in time, I do share my story a lot. But at that time, like early 20s, the things that started happening as far as those triggers, I went back to like not sleeping at all. I would maybe a couple hours of sleep a day, constant caffeine. I would go from like okay mood to immense anger in like 0.6 seconds. Like it was very intense, and I would not have an understanding of why. There was a lot of behaviors that triggered me that I wouldn't understand at that point in time yet. So if someone had a certain tone or said a certain word, or they watched a certain TV show or drank a certain beverage, right? Like things like that, just everyday life things were everywhere triggering me.
And what did the trigger look like? Was this just an immense fight or flight? Was this the shift from fine to rage in a split second? What was the outcome of that for you?
So as the years went by, they changed. Initially, it was, anger and shutdown, and lack of sleep. As the years went by, they became more intense. Like I would be in a trigger for weeks sometimes, and I would just be experiencing like really bad depression or flashbacks for weeks where I couldn't get out of it. I didn't understand the difference between reality and these things I was experiencing.
So I have a couple of questions. Number one, were you able in that moment to be able to pinpoint and connect the dot back to the experience? Did you understand?
Not at that time.
Yeah. And the second thing I have, I'm very careful in saying this. I am not a medical professional. I am not a psychiatrist. I am not a psychologist. I am not a therapist. I am a coach. So this is not medical advice. This is a point of view. There are too many things that are misdiagnosed.
Yes.
Like borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, ADHD, because we're having these extreme mood swings, which as somebody who does parts work with my clients, I can say there are some very strong protective parts that are coming up. The good girl part, I need to be quiet. But then the rage part is like, fuck this shit. Like, this is horrible. And so now you're in this extreme polarization, if you will, this extreme swing, or you're in freeze and you're completely shut down, which can very much look like ADHD when your executive function goes offline because your amygdala is too hot, right? So there's all these different things that are happening where people can be misdiagnosed and therefore mistreated with medication, what have you, because there is no such thing as an appropriate trauma diagnosis in the book that the doctors use to diagnose these kinds of extreme things that we see happening with people.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you brought that up. Throughout my like teenage years, young adult years, especially like my teenage years as I, got into adolescence and whatnot, my mom would like suggest bringing me to a therapist, and she would bring, and it's right, like these stories, and I talked to,
what did she think you were going to do?
I've spoken to hundreds of survivors, and I hear these stories so much, but
did she think you were going to go to a therapist and not talk about the abuse?
Well, the thing is like, right, it goes back to that 9-year-old brain of, okay, you're told, do not do this, right? Your brain is still trained in that, okay, I'm not going to do this. So there were several times that I was forced to going to see a therapist as an adolescent between the ages of 9 and 18. And I would hear my mom say things to the therapist as well as like say to me all the time, joking, quote unquote, oh, she must have like multiple personalities, or she's bipolar. And she'd like laugh about it. And right now, what I know about abuse and narcissism and things like that, I know that's a normal behavior from that kind of person. And I understand the ways that these behaviors come about, and not to take them personally, right? Because I've gone through my training. But here, I do hear of a lot of trauma survivors, especially those who go through serious abuse or other traumas in childhood, receive misdiagnoses, especially women, in terms of bipolar and like multiple personality disorder. And it's a thing that I'm also seeing a lot of trauma therapists, like they're starting to fight back and become more public about like, we need to do better at diagnosing, or we need to go in and revisit people who have been diagnosed with these things and like, retest them and go through certain phases with them again to see if that diagnosis is proper, and because of the medications and stuff.
Look, I'm a big follower of Mastin Kipp. I'm a big follower of Bessel van der Kolk. They talk about this all the time. They're very big in the trauma space. They're very well respected in the trauma space. Bessel van der Kolk is a goddamn PhD, MD. I'm sorry, not a PhD. He's an MD. He's a medical doctor. He was actually contracted by the organization that puts out the DSM-5, which every single diagnosis comes from, to come up with an appropriate diagnosis for all of these people that are displaying these PTSD-like symptoms, but had never been in war. And so he did this over many, many years and interviewed and researched hundreds of people. And there was no pharmacological component to this. He came up with something called developmental trauma disorder. And they ixnayed it. They said no, they wouldn't put it in. Complex PTSD, not in there. So, it's important for people to understand, in order for a psychiatrist, psychologist, psychotherapist to get paid by insurance, they must take a diagnosis from this flow. It's the only way they can get paid. And so if your diagnosis is not in there because it's really a complex PTSD, or this is some sort of culmination of ongoing, prolonged stress, abuse, neglect, abandonment, which can show up in all these different ways. It challenges the way we think. It challenges the way we process things in our mind. It challenges the way our body functions. If we don't have the appropriate thing to pull from, the doctors are just going to find the things that most match it.
Yep. Yeah. And it's sad. It's really sad.
And it's a tough thing for me to say, because I have a lot of friends that are therapists, and the people who understand it and who specialize in trauma, because not all mental health professionals specialize in trauma. The ones that specialize in trauma are ready to call bullshit on it. Those who are not, do not. And it is fine. It is what it is. But it's important for people to understand how many survivors, thrivers, people who have been through these horrible circumstances, are told that horrible circumstance had nothing to do with why they're showing up this way.
Yeah. Yeah. It must
Which
be a chemical imbalance.
further traumatizing, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it must be a
No,
chemical imbalance. Let's just ignore what's actually really happening. So you go through this experience. I'd love for you to share a little bit about what the healing journey has been.
So prior to starting my healing journey, I was in and out of the doctors a lot. My CPTSD had really taken into my physical body. I was experiencing adrenal fatigue, seizures. I was experiencing many strokes. I had concussions that led to inept speech. I had to go to speech therapy. I wasn't allowed to drive my car for a period of time. I had hypoglycemia. I wasn't sleeping, right? Like literally a huge,
But you did not
list.
have a CPTSD diagnosis at this point.
Correct.
So your body's screaming.
Yeah.
Because by the way, people, feelings buried alive never die.
Yeah.
I did not come up with that saying. That is a legit book. The feelings buried alive never die. And so, the whole idea behind this is we have these incredibly stressful situations. And again, going back to what we talked about earlier, who did you have to be able to go to with this? Who's helping you process these feelings and these emotions and these interpretations from this experience? Your body's going to go freaking haywire. So you're talking seizure. What did you say? You said seizures,
many strokes, borderline adrenal fatigue. I had to go through speech therapy at one point. I was having concussions, blackouts, hypoglycemia. There was a lot of things. And as far as who to go to for help, I mean, at that point in time, I hadn't gone to anyone because when you unfortunately grow up in negative environments or you're used to certain situations, you tend to go back into them, whether you try to or not. It's a cycle until you learn to break it. So the people that were in my circle were not trusted enough for me to talk to. But as far as the physical things that were happening, I mean, I was in and out of doctor's offices for years. I went to really great neurology out of college. And so they had all this testing equipment and I went through the ringer. They could not figure out what was going on with me. I was also very high risk for cancer, constantly in and out of outpatient procedures, doctor's offices, biopsies. This thing would not go away for cervical cancer. It just kept coming back. And no one could figure out what was going on with me. None of the doctors, they're we're trying everything and these things look normal, but your results and the way you're living is abnormal and we don't understand where it's coming from. And there was just negative environment, right, from my personal life coming up to, going back into those relationship cycles with the wrong people. And in the process of going through all this physical stuff in my life, I was also going through mental and emotional things in bad relationships, friendships, family. And I was running a business. I was actually running a really successful business because all of that just compartmentalized into my business. So all the issues I had in my personal life, I was like, I'm going to make something good out of myself. And I was really successful from age 25, 26 until age 28 when I had my suicide attempt. As far as business was concerned and my career growing up, I was a great leader, constantly being provided with innovation opportunities and leadership opportunities, opening up new businesses. I helped hundreds of business owners to do so good. I was making $320,000 a year when I was 27 years old as a self-made small business owner. As a solopreneur, I was doing great things.
That's amazing.
But all that stress going into my business and then not dealing with the physical and not knowing what's going on. And I just totally imploded and went into a suicide attempt in 2015. And I was lucky for me now, because I'm so glad that I'm here. I was caught by my boyfriend, who's my ex, but my boyfriend at the time caught me in the middle of my attempt, came in, and he was like, you have two options. I'm either going to call the police and you're going to be committed, or you can call someone right now and they can take care of you and they can like figure out what to do with you. And it was like 2:00 in the morning. And I was like, oh my gosh, like who's going to pick up the phone at 2 a.m.? And I called someone, the only person I could think of. They answered the phone. They came and got me. And I was living in Atlanta at the time. I was put on the plane like the next day down to Florida to come be with my family. Who this is right pre-diagnosis, pre-healing, pre-knowing any better. But I was put on a plane to come be with my family. And they sent me to trauma therapists. I spent, I spent 72 hours on suicide watch. I was in their offices all day, right? I was going through all those tests and everything. And once they realized, okay, so she's not going to commit suicide. She's fine. Let's try talking to her, because I was completely silent. I was still in shock. It took me weeks to say anything. I literally would just go to the office, and I was there maybe 2 or 3 hours a day, multiple times a week. I would not say a word, still at that time. And when I finally did break down after weeks, and when I say break down, I mean like uncontrollable crying, shaking. I don't understand what my body is going through. It was a release of all of my emotions, all of my trauma finally, because after weeks in this office, is someone being kind to me and welcoming my experiences and making me feel somewhat safe.
Yeah.
My body just released all of these tears and crying. And if you don't know about crying, it's actually your body's way of releasing stress. It's very therapeutic. Prior to that, I was like ironclad. I was black.
Did you share in that moment what had happened to you in childhood?
I don't remember really going through that in the beginning stages of my therapy. We mostly were just going through understanding why I was making the decision to try and commit suicide and just to get back to communication. So for a couple months, that's all that was focused on. And when my therapist at the time was comfortable, she with telling me, okay, you can go back to Atlanta. You're free, but here is a therapist that you need to see. She's a trauma therapist. I was diagnosed with CPTSD at that time. And I had to be escorted basically back home. And I had to commit to like a certain amount of visits and like really go through an intense plan. At that time, when I met my trauma therapist in Atlanta, when I went back home.
And I just have to ask you, were you in an intensive outpatient? Is that why you had to make this commitment when you went back to Atlanta?
No, I wasn't in an outpatient facility at all. It's just the way that their office was, that their team was. I refused to go that route. So the compromise was to be private. But when I was sent back to Atlanta, the therapist in Florida got in touch with the person in Atlanta and told them what they knew and gave me instructions on, okay, this is what you say, this is where you go. When I went to the therapist in Atlanta, she explained who she was, which at the time she was one of the only EMDR practicing therapists in the area, which 8 years ago. And I do remember this very vividly, being told, listen, there's this thing called EMDR. It's considered basically like witchcraft in the like therapy community at that time. This is
what they told you.
Yeah. Okay. They were like, this isn't something that you're going to find a lot of on the internet. In your research, there's not that many people that do it. For a lot of therapists, they consider it like quote unquote witchcraft because there's nothing proven yet. It's not highly practiced. And it wasn't at the time. There was not a lot of professionals doing it. And I was like, oh, okay. And I'm very type A, logical. 1 + 1 has to equal 2. And there's only black and white and there's no color to me at the time. There's no emotions. So I went through that process, and she, I think, recognized as a professional that I needed to relate to someone in order to start healing. And she shared her own story of child sexual abuse with me.
Yeah.
And I never opened up before that. I didn't share that experience outside of, the court case that was to that closed room. But I had never shared that. And I'm so grateful for her.
She had
thank
deep
God
intuition.
She did.
Yeah.
And her sharing her story with me is literally the reason why I'm here today.
Yeah. Let's just sit with that for a second, because when I hear that, I know as a coach, that was intuition playing her on that part. There was something she recognized in you that was like, there's something unspoken still here. Let me just share my own experience here and let her know she's not alone.
Yeah. Yeah. And she even told me, she's like, I think I've shared this with less than a handful of my patients. And she had been practicing for like 40 years at that point. And it's what I needed. It is absolutely what I needed. And I'm very well connected with a lot of trauma therapists today because of what I do professionally. And most of them will tell you, I don't share this side of me, but they share privately with me, but I am a trauma survivor. And this is why I went into this. And
well, it's a big difference between trauma therapists and coaches, because as coaches, we are taught this is a side-by-side, peer-based, client-led process. And the more you can make a connection and attune with the client by sharing a shared experience, they will feel less alone and more as though you'll truly understand. And it is part of and listen, I have no problem with therapy. We've used all kinds of therapists over the last 20 years. And I have a lot of friends that are therapists that are phenomenal at what they do. And there's great benefit in working with them. But there's a difference when you're working with a coach, because you have a little bit more of a peer-based side-by-side relationship versus that across the table, I'm here, you're there, and I'm only going to listen to you. But at no time, even if I relate to it, am I going to share with you that I relate to that. Yeah.
And she would literally get down hands and knees with me.
Yeah. Perfect.
And I vividly see it. She's 100% like the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing today, why I want to help other women, why I want to help other trauma survivors experience what I did through her. She wasn't my end all be all, right? She wasn't my one-stop shop. There's obviously there's multiple areas of support that you need in order to be a holistic human and align your life. But she was the beginning stages of understanding. Yeah. And I think I don't necessarily recommend everyone to do that as a trauma therapist, but the fact that she did that and she would literally be on hands and knees, holding my hand, grabbing me, holding me, that is what I needed at that point as a 28-year-old who just tried to commit suicide as an adult, finally looking at taking these things out of my brain for the first time.
It's an amazing story. Listen, we're going to wrap this up here because we have so much more to discuss, and we're just going to take it into a second episode. Guys, Ashley's story is unfortunately not a unique one.
Yeah.
And if someone's listening today that resonates with that story, and maybe you haven't found the ability or the courage or the safe place to share, reach out to, say, Ashley. All of her contact information is going to be in the show notes. Find a trauma-focused therapist. Find a trauma-focused coach. Any kind of trauma-trained mental health professional to at least sit with and start the healing journey, because you can move through this. It's just a lot of work. I really appreciate you sharing your story. For anybody that's listening to it that got triggered by the story, I apologize in the sense that it's a lot and you're so well versed and so eloquent for it. But for some people, you may be describing something that they've experienced that they've never shared with anyone. Right? Yeah. So I just want to take a moment and honor that space for that person and let them know that they're not alone. And we're going to bring Ashley back for an episode 2, a part 2 of this interview. And you'll get that link in the show notes as well, where we're going to really talk about what happened after this? What happened after this cathartic journey with this trauma therapist? And where does that lead her to today? So people that are interested in what she does can get a little bit more of Ashley. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks.
We've really appreciated having you. And I'm really excited to bring part 2 to our listeners. So guys, if you like this, tune in, subscribe, get notified. We drop a cast every single week. And thank you for joining us.